Hello, everybody, and welcome to the History Center of San Luis Obispo County. I'm so happy to see such a wonderful audience, both here in person as well as online. We at the History Center are dedicated to preserving, promoting, and teaching about the history of San Luis Obispo County. We believe that without a firm understanding of where we've been, we really couldn't understand where we're going. And so that's why we're here, and that's why we are so thrilled to be able to put on talks like this. If you want to make sure that you are in the loop for upcoming events, please do make sure that you're signed up for our newsletter. I know a lot of you saw the emails about this particular event, but if you aren't subscribed and you'd like to, online, you can just send an email to info@historycenterslo.org, or in person, you can just talk to me after tonight, and we'll make sure that you get added. Please do keep on your calendar that we're going to be opening the Dalladea Adobe Gardens for the season on Sunday, April 7th. We're going to have Family Day, and it's going to be an amazing event, so please keep it on your calendar, and we'd love to see you there. The Dalladea is just an utter jewel of San Luis Obispo history. And so, with no further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our speaker this evening, Pete Kelley, who is an author, a volunteer, a restaurateur, a historian par excellence. We have copies of Pete's book, The Quick and the Dead, available for sale here at the museum. If you get any more copies of your cookbook, let me know. We'd love to get that back into stock because it's been very popular. Okay. Pete is a longtime volunteer here at the History Center, especially on our exhibits committee. He's also a former president of our board of directors. And so I'm very grateful to Pete for being here this evening and for sharing what's going to be a phenomenal lecture. So please all welcome Pete Kelley.
Thanks, Thomas. Thank you. Well, just to start off, I'm going to give you a definition of a klystron. Now, I'm a historian, not an engineer. People ask me, how does the klystron work? Don't ask me, ask an engineer. But anyway, it's a specialized linear beam vacuum tube used to amplify high radio frequencies. Okay, now I'm going to start you out in 1937 at Stanford. And that's where the Varian brothers finally got this tube to work like they wanted it to work. And this became very, very important. The British took the klystron tube and turned it into a magnetron, which they used for detecting approaching aircraft. So as the Nazi Air Force attacked England, suddenly they had radar and they can tell where they were coming. Okay, other people say this capability became the Allies' single most important technology advantage during the war and directly affected the outcome far more than the atomic bomb. So of all ironies, it was two Irish Americans from Halcyon that saved England in their darkest hour. What did they get for it? Okay. Britain's radio spotter most startling development of war. Okay, so that's more about it. Now, the klystron, do you guys know what this is? This is the observatory in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. And this was the world's largest electronic telescope that they were probing the universe with. And during Hurricane Marie, it collapsed, unfortunately. And they found at the bottom 2 7-foot klystrons. Okay. Then, do you know what the Goldstone tracking project was? This is during all the Apollo missions. They had 3 of these microwaves, and one was in Australia, one was in California. Where was the other one, Rick? I forget right now. Anyway, that's how they communicated with all the Apollos on the moon shot and all the other shots. Okay, and they all used klystron tubes. This is the size of the klystron that was used for Goldstone. And this klystron here, they took 57 of these and stacked them from New York to California, and that allowed live programs in New York to be broadcast live in California, thanks to these.
Excuse me, that was radio or TV or what?
They were broadcasting television.
No.
The vacuum tube technology has largely fallen into obsolescence, obsolete. Satellites, physics, research, communication hardware, medical devices, waste remedial systems, and soil treatment processes, even today, make use of the klystron. Okay, so that is what it's all about. But let's go forward and then back in time. While we were doing the research on this exhibit, that book Palo Alto was published, and it was a critique of Leland Stanford, Hoover, the Hoover Institute, the Silicon Valley, all this stuff. And it's a very radical critique of all this. So I thought, since I went to Palo Alto High School and used to skateboard as a young man all around Varian Associates, I thought, well, I ought to read this book. So I get to the part on Varian Associates, and the guy says they're much more Halcyon than they are Palo Alto, which I knew right away. The guy knew what he was talking about. Now, here is John Varian. And John Varian was an Irish mystic. And this is, he's putting on a play. He's been called California's greatest poet. He was amazing, influential with the Dunites and the Dune Forum. And he was kind of the head guy at one of the leaders at Halcyon, which is a theosophist community that tries to blend science with mysticism. That's basically, if you have to boil it down. Okay, so here we go at Halcyon, and John Varian moved to the United States in 1894. He moved to Palo Alto in 1903. Then they moved to Halcyon. Okay. And John ended up dying in 1931. He was born in 1863. So John, it's really a funny story because his family in, it wasn't Galway, County Cork, owned this brush factory, okay, where they made brushes. Well, John Varian encouraged the workers in his own factory to go on strike, and this perturbed the whole family. Plus, he had asthma, so they shipped him out to California to keep him out of trouble and to a drier climate. Then, so they put in Agnes, who he married, was his second cousin, who had moved from the United States to Ireland and then came back to the United States. Okay.
Can I interrupt real quick? When you're showing photos to the audience, can you make sure to point them at the screen as well?
Sure.
Thank you.
And all these things I'm showing are also part of the exhibit. So Russ, because of this book that Russ's wife wrote called the inventor and the pilot, we refer to Russ as the inventor. Okay. And Russ was always, first of all, they were all curious. And their upbringing in Halcyon, they all talk about it, what a wonderful time it was, how much fun they had, all the interesting things that were going on. They're really a nature family. They later on, I'll get into it, were founding members of the Sierra Club, all these other things. Anyway, Russ graduated from Arroyo Grande High School at age 17, despite him having dyslexia, and he got enrolled in Stanford, and he earned a bachelor's and master's degree in physics, and then he went to work for Humble Oil and Philo Farnsworth to develop television tube technology.
What are we talking about?
Russ is working on that, and meanwhile, his brother goes to Cal Poly for a while, but then he decides he wants to become a pilot. So he doesn't graduate from Poly, and Russ says that he thought Halcyon had been the ideal place in which to grow up. Okay. Now, some of the people that were growing up with the Varian boys in Halcyon were George Harrison, not the Beatle, but as a noted physicist and dean of science at MIT, Henry Cowell is an internationally acclaimed composer of modern music, and Russell and Sig Varian. John Varian wasn't very practical and realistic, but he was very supportive of the community. And so here were these boys growing up in Halcyon, having a great time. And just to give you an idea, this is a little later, but this is the pilot. And in 1946, he invented an electric surfboard. The next electric surfboard was invented in 2023.
That would have been the father.
So now, Sig became a pilot, and here's one of his planes right over here on the wall. And that is actually parked right by what they call the pike. And right on the other side of the trees would be Halcyon. And he got a hold of that plane. And then they had the big earthquake in Santa Barbara in 1925. So Sig, but no one really knew what was, remember in 1925, there wasn't that much communication. People didn't know what had happened to Santa Barbara. Sig flew down with a reporter from the Fresno Bee and flew over all the damage and everything. And that was the first reports of that Santa Barbara earthquake, which made that new California architectural design. You know, it's what they thought old California should have looked like, but all these buildings are designed that way. That all came out of that earthquake. Okay, then as he was flying for Mexicana de Aviación and which was swallowed up by Pan Am, but he was flying all over Mexico and Central America, all the way down to Panama. And it was really crazy. You know, there wasn't radar, and he was always thinking about, how can I miss all these mountains and all this, you know, we need to invent something that can penetrate the mist. That's why we called this exhibit Penetrating the Mist. And he even crashed on this beach south of Oaxaca on the Pacific side in Chiapas, which is a really notorious, I've read accounts of other people that got stuck there on boats. It's a very dangerous and primitive area, and the people that live out there have hardly been contacted at all by civilization. Well, Sig forced landed on one of those sand dunes, crashed, and somehow survived and talked him into helping him and came out. And that's not the last time that happened to him. Okay. Now, so there you have Sig flying all around as a pilot for Pan Am, and you have Russ working for these different companies. And Sig, by this time, the Spanish Civil War has broken out, and they saw what the Nazis did to Guernica, bombing Guernica, and they were anti-fascist, and they realized that Hitler had to be stopped by any means they could, and that was their main political thing. Well, by 1931 or 32, actually this was mid-30s, this guy moved to Halcyon, and we have his book right back in here in this cabinet. His name is Schuschman, and he wrote a book called Memoirs and Musings of a Maverick. When I read that book, which is really hard to find, it was amazing. And he ended up being the chief welder for the Varian brothers, welding these glass tubes and stuff, which was very difficult. Hardly anybody else can do it. Okay, so when he first shows up there, he is introduced. Actually, he came from a utopian commune in Northern California called Casadero. And after that, he moved down to Halcyon, where he was introduced to the Varian boys. And he says, we spent most of the morning talking about the social, political, and industrial philosophies each one of us was ideologically comfortable with. Remember, this is at the height of the Depression. This is 1933. Roosevelt had just been elected. Eric, that's their other brother's theme, was workers' rights. Without belaboring the subject, Sig and Russ both leaned toward a modified democratic socialism in which incentives and rewards were equated to induced motives for individual or group efforts in the direction of real instead of artificial or assumed values. Okay, so finally, in 1935, Sig was suffering from bad asthma. Russ decided it's time to try to figure out some of these inventions they were thinking about. So they moved back to Halcyon, and Sig had great ideas. Like, they knew what they wanted. They knew the end, what they wanted to get to. They wanted to be able to navigate through fog and mist and mountains. They just didn't know how that was going to be done. But so they moved back to Halcyon, and they started working on it. And they even, Karen White, who still lives in Halcyon and was a little girl with Sig and Russ's children, told us that the pit they dug this huge pit, and they lined it with something because now they were starting experiments. So they were doing all these electron experiments right in Halcyon in this huge pit they had dug. And it was pretty wild. So that went on. And then they decided that they would go up. Stanford offered them $100 in a lab, and they could use that lab in their equipment. And the price they had to pay was Stanford would get 50% of all their patents. Now you know why Stanford is so well funded. So they went up there and they started working on their ideas. And Schuschman worked at the lab right across from him at Stanford. And, you know, they were going along and making progress. They invited Schussmann, who was working for someone else, to come back and start welding for them. Then in 1937, finally, this klystron worked. Okay, so here we are, 1937. Things are starting to heat up in Europe and elsewhere, and they keep working at Stanford on their klystron, and now other companies and corporations are getting real interested in this. So Sperry Gyroscope approaches them, a factory on Long Island, and strictly produce klystron tubes under the guise of the Varian brothers and Schussmann. So they get to Long Island. This is 1941, and they set up, and the Sperry people go, "What are you doing?" The Varians believe in horizontal decision making. All the engineers reach a consensus. Okay, Sperry believes in vertical decision making. The boss tells you what to do and you just do it. So they said to the Varian boys, they said, "Well, no, that's not how we do things at Sperry." And the Varian boys said, "Guess what? We either do it that way or we're moving back to California." So Sperry gave in, and that factory became the most productive that Sperry ever had. But they also warned them, because a lot of these industries during this period of time had a lot of sympathy towards Germany, okay? And Sperry was one of the ones that they suspected of this. And they said, "Listen, if one of these klystron tubes is ever found in a German airplane, we're out of here." And right at the end of the war, lo and behold, a klystron tube was found in a German airplane. So they said adios to Sperry, and they moved to San Carlos. And you can see right here on the way up is this big poster of the first Varian Associates. Now, the most important thing you got to remember is it's not Varian and Associates, it's Varian Associates. Like, hey, you work here, we're all equal. Okay. They were the first ones to open a plant in the Stanford Industrial Park, which was followed by Hewlett-Packard, Fairchild, and you guys know the rest, the whole Silicon Valley. Okay. So they wanted to build their factory in the middle and then have housing all around it where people could have gardens and raise animals and make it kind of like a Halcyon North. Okay. They also did all sorts of reforms like flexible schedule, the horizontal decision making, all these reforms that nobody had done before. And Hewlett Packard and everybody copied them. Okay. So they went along well, and they started Varian Associates, and everything was going good. And then they got the news that HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, and the FBI was going to pull all their funds because they thought they were too pink. They were commies. So here is, now remember, we've all read about Oppenheimer, right? And seen the movie and read the book. Well, this is exactly the milieu the Varian brothers were in the Bay Area. They were at Stanford. Oppenheimer was at Berkeley, but all the same groups and organizations and everything was going on. And the Varian brothers were part of it, just like Oppenheimer was. And so as they went after Oppenheimer and took away his pass to, they kicked him out basically of the Atomic Energy Commission. They went after the Varian brothers, but they weren't very successful. And, I had my little sister had this friend in Palo Alto whose mom was in with all these people. And, you know, they funded the Sierra Club, they funded all these other things, the ACLU and all this. And just to kind of give you an example how crazy things were, my friend's mom got arrested nude in the fountain in Berkeley because she belonged to the Sexual Freedom League. This is 1960. So that's what the Varians were like. And they even decided they were going to form this development called Ladera, which there still is a Ladera near Stanford. But at this time, they wanted to make this Ladera where they had black couples and mixed couples and Asians and all the scientists from Varian Associates. Well, the feds wouldn't lend them any money or give them permission because you weren't allowed to make a development that wasn't segregated in those days. So that was another thing that was discouraging to them. And they basically, unfortunately, both died around 1960. And I'll read you this thing towards the end. Somehow it seemed appropriate that Sig's death should occur. He was flying his plane in an area he loved. Okay, Sig was flying to Puerto Vallarta. And once again, he got caught on a sandbar right outside the surf and the beach. He drowned. His passenger survived. He's buried in Guadalajara, and he personally paid for the first hospital in Puerto Vallarta. Okay, so he had lived an adventurous and full life, conquering many almost insurmountable obstacles, surviving 4 attacks of tuberculosis and other illnesses. Each time he had bounced back, but this time his odds were against him. Had he had a choice, I'm sure he would have chosen to go this way, flying into the gathering dusk for one last daring feat. Sig's flair for adventure characterized his life. The initial work on the klystron had been an adventure fraught with uncertainty. The founding of Varian Associates took self-assurance, confidence, and a willingness to take a gamble in support of his dream and ideals. A creative, hard-working man, his leadership was essential to the early success of Varian Associates, and his personality gave him the love and friendship of everyone whom he came in contact with. Okay, he was born on May 4th, 1901, and died on October 18th, 1961. Now, he married the British consulate's daughter, the British consulate in Veracruz's daughter, which is kind of amazing, once again, for an Irishman to marry an Englishman. But see, it just goes to show love rules over all that other stuff. Okay, and thinking back to what happened on that cold dock, Russ died in Alaska on a trip to find another state park, and the tide had changed, and he was hauling on the anchor and trying to get him out of there when he died of a heart attack. The memory that remains of the night before when we anchored a small bay in a lonely wilderness location. We hiked along the stream feeding into the bay, had dinner on the beach, and sat around the campfire talking about our trip and enjoying the companionship of our friends. As the evening ended, Russell sang the Irish songs we all loved. It was a magic moment under the stars. Russell was happy and at peace, as he had written about the wilderness. You are returning home to the clean, simple world in which the race was born, in which your remote ancestors grew to fit, and sit beside that focal point of life, to talk and sing with those who share this world. So Russ was born in 1898 and he died in 1959. Okay, now, they were very good friends with the artist Ansel Adams because they cut their teeth in the dunes, taking pictures of the sand dunes and such. And in honor of Russell, Ansel Adams took 15 of his best photographs that had not been published. And then they took 15 of John Varian's best poems, and they put one with each photograph. And these were sold as a fundraiser for the Sierra Club. Okay. Now, you know, Jack Varian is the son of the pilot Sig Varian, and he lives in Parkfield on the V6 ranch. And so part of the great thing about this exhibit was that I got to meet Jack Varian. He's in his 80s now. He's a cowboy. And he was working in Palo Alto for Varian Associates right after he graduated from Palo Alto High. And his dad, Sig, goes, well, Jack, how do you like it? And he goes, well, I don't really enjoy this factory work that much. And his dad goes, well, what do you want to be? And he goes, a cowboy. And he is. He's a cowboy. And he also was a major, formed the first Nature Conservancy ranch, where he put his ranch in a certain trust. So his children can't break it up and sell it. It's got to be sold whole, intact, and not sold at all. And that was a big reform. And so that's what they did. And Jack's mom kept these scrapbooks of everything. I'm talking about books that are that tall and that thick. And there were 7 of them. And it was all full of scrapbook material from the Varian brothers. So thanks to this exhibit and a donation from Rob Rossi, we scanned the whole thing. So this is all preserved now. The hard copy at the thumbnail, it's actually a huge thumbnail, whatever it's called, is here at the History Center. I have copies of everything that was printed because I'm still doing research on this. But that was a big accomplishment because now when Jack passes on, all that stuff is now going to be preserved. So that was one of the things we learned doing this exhibit. And then, of course, you all have probably heard of Sheila Varian and her horse ranch. But Sheila was the daughter of Eric. That was another brother, the youngest brother, who did move to Long Island with him. But basically, Eric stayed around this area. And when he played football at Cal Poly, they called him the Fighting Irishman from Halcyon. So I'll open it up to any questions. Sheila started the ranch. I think with her, you know, with the help of her dad and her family. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was Sheila's ranch. And Sheila, you know, these little books they have on different areas in the county, they're images of America. The one on Halcyon's, you can see Sheila at age 9 with her first horse. So it's kind of nice. And you can see some of these other people I'm talking about. But yeah, and so that's what people in this county, when they think of the Varians, they don't know about their parents. They just know about Sheila and Jack and Parkfield. So it's pretty, this is a story that has to be told, you know. Yes.
So who's Sig? Is Sig to your right and Russ to your left?
Sig is to your right and Russ is to your left, exactly. Sig is to my right and Russ is to my left.
Oh, okay.
So these were the things that these posters were up at, which I was telling somebody earlier, we're up at Fry's, which is an electronics store in the Bay Area in Sunnyvale. They're like Radio Shack. And Fry's decided that they would go completely online for sales. And they had their kind of mother store in Sunnyvale. And they had all over this huge ceiling different pictures of people from Silicon Valley. And so they were giving them away. So we went up there, but we couldn't just climb up on ladders and take them down. We had to hire professional moving people and union people that were insured, that had the right equipment to go up to the ceiling, take this stuff down. So our free pictures ended up costing quite a bit, but that's all right. It's worth it.
Yeah.
Yes, Joe.
Where's the original scrapbooks? Where did they go?
They're at Jack Varian's V6 ranch. So, but now they're all copied and everything. So, and also with those pictures, because Jack showed me those pictures and of the ones that Ansel Adams did, and there's 15 pictures, and he's got 4 kids. So he was, God, how am I going to divide these up or whatever? But now he doesn't have to, because their exact replicas were made. And the curator at Stanford said, well, we have 11 of the 15 pictures, and they're worth about $800,000.
Wow.
So these things end up,
Per piece.
the whole collection.
But still, that's quite a bit of money.
Yeah, it is. Buy an Ansel Adams original and see what they charge you. Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Kelley?
No. That might happen someday.
Mr. Kelley?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Dad. Good job. That was an excellent lecture.
Thanks. It's still going on.
There's questions in the chat. Do you want me to read them?
This is my daughter from Austin, Texas, who's zooming in. What's that, Maritza?
Do you want me to read to you the questions in the chat from the Zoom?
Yes.
Okay. How long is the exhibit up for visitors?
This exhibit's going to be up here for about another month, and then it's going to the South County Historical Society.
Okay, great. Okay, so 1 more month and then go to South County. Another question. Does the Varian house still stand in Halcyon?
Does the Varian house still stand in Halcyon? Well, I know that Ella Young's house still stands, and it was originally put up for sale. I believe, Roberta, do you know if that Varian house is still standing in Halcyon? Maybe Roberta disappeared.
Yes, you can see John Varian's house. It's on the same road as the Temple of the People and the Hiawatha Lodge in Halcyon. There are a lot of tchotchkes around the entrance to it, and that's John Varian's house.
Okay, so the Varian house is still there, John Varian's. And you know, if you drive down Halcyon Road and you get to where the post office and the store was, now it's a nursery, you turn right and you go by the Temple of the People and the Hiawatha Lodge, and a little past that is John Varian's house.
And then the last question is if you will be writing a book about the Varians.
I don't know if I will be or not. I would like to write a book about the Varians, but whether I ever get around to it or not is up in the air. Okay, thank you, Maritza. Yes.
You're in the ballpark there. That if you go past the temple, there's a house on Temple Street. You go down to Ladue Street. There are 2 Varian properties just south of Ladue Street. One of them, I've been there 45 years, but I'm young.
Right,
but
you are.
The pit that they had built and was cemented in, and it collapsed, but it was there.
It's still down there by Karen White's house, she told me.
Except that it's all filled in now.
Right.
And then there was a second piece of property, and clear back at the back end of town, and it's known as the Varian property. And Sheila, in her trust, gave that to the temple, and it just changed hands 10 years after her death.
Okay.
Become a part of the temple's property.
Well, thank you, which reminds me kind of that as far as the teachings at Halcyon, and there's something important in here that I didn't read to you, but now this book here, Radiance from Halcyon, A Utopian Experiment in Religion and Science by Paul L. E. Ivy. This is a great book if you want to know a lot about Halcyon. And this guy is the world's expert on John Varian. Okay, so they lived in an era of new energy and became preoccupied with electricity as the core link between the spiritual and the material world, even creating distinct language games understood by temple members in the process. Bolstered by their faith in the utter naturalness of spiritual kinship as revealed in theosophy, members of the community became the embodiment of messianic spirit of progressive evolution that their study sessions and ritual workshops continue renewed. In this specific time and place, their own symbolic order became a communal reality that fostered an atmosphere of experimentation and discovery. Well, they sure did that, didn't they? And I think there was one.
You mentioned that Ansel Adams' photographs and his poems were published. There is such a book.
They were sold to people as a fundraiser for the Sierra Club. So there's a very limited amount. Jack Varian had one. Stanford has an impartial collection. So if you can find one, hang on to it. Okay, now. Harrison Spectrograph, that's the guy that ended up being a dean at MIT. The Varian brothers klystron, in a sense, unseen spiritual forces later were recognized as real, scientifically verified material forces that enable our networks of contemporary communication and complex imaging systems. The early interchange between spirituality and science in Halcyon, a balancing of intuition and rationality taught in the builder's lessons, provide a striking and suggestive model for successful creative endeavor. Dower and his Halcyon colleagues interested in ideas that were in many ways science fiction or pseudoscience, but they were convinced of the potential of invisible subatomic particles for the healing of disease. Their encouragement to think outside the box and their belief that spiritual forces could be manifested physically serve as a remarkable backdrop to the objective techniques required in the scientific enterprises of their children, who substantiate the technology and healing capabilities of radiant waves. So you can see how these guys were benefited by their upraising in Halcyon. Any other questions? Yes.
Are there other prototypes of the klystron?
Did anybody besides Varian Associates make them? Yeah. When it first came out and after World War II, everybody wanted to make klystron tubes. But then the Varian brothers decided that they would continue manufacturing them. At first, they were just going to farm them out, kind of, but then they decided they would just do them themselves. And I always have the feeling that, you know, they both died around 1960, and they didn't care about becoming rich, although they did all along when they were inventing this stuff. And in Halcyon in the early days, they talked about one of Russ's inventions is going to pull our family out of poverty, because they had wonderful things in Halcyon, but money wasn't one of them. Okay. But I think the engineers they hired at Stanford after World War II were more interested in making a lot of money than the Varians were. So then it became very competitive in that Stanford Industrial Park, microwave, all that industry. Any other? Yes.
Can you tell us something about their parents? It's unusual to have children who get so involved in physics and, you know, what's the background that causes this to happen?
The background of their parents?
Yeah.
Well, you know, they were lovers of the outdoors, and theosophy, in a way, you could call it nature worship if you wanted. And so they were very open-minded and taught them to think creatively and think outside the box, and gave them every freedom they could. And just as a little anecdote, there was a lady named Anita Garcia Jones, who was active in this history center for years and years. And she died at age 107, like 2 years ago. And Anita, when she was a little kid, was living in Arroyo Grande, and she took piano lessons at Halcyon from the Varians. And she'd get on her bicycle to ride to Halcyon, and her mother would say, "You watch out for them do-nights." And then, as they were giving piano lessons, you know, in World War II, if you remember from the Steinbeck book, East of Eden, well, during World War II, Germans, even German Americans, were being questioned about their patriotism. And the Varians, anybody that's Irish and believes in an Irish Republican, an enemy of Germany becomes a friend of Ireland. So one piano lesson person's parents got mad because the Varians supported Germany over England in World War I, and said, "Well, we're going to pull out of our piano lessons here." And they said, "Great, get out of here." So, did I answer your question? Kind of? Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
Is Varian Associates still in business?
Yes, it is. And mainly they're doing very advanced imaging for hospitals. Yeah, that's their #1 product now. Yes.
Did their technology have anything to do with radar?
Yes, the whole klystron tube was the founder of radar. With that's what it was. Klystron tube and the magnetron were radar. And Germany didn't have radar. We didn't have radar. Thanks to the Varian brothers, we got radar. Joe?
Did you come across the name of John Hammond in your research? He was on the East Coast, and he's only second to Thomas Edison for the number of patents that he created at the same time period in the 30s. And he was working with the government and radar and sonar. And I was wondering if there was any association that he came across.
You know, it rings a bell. It does ring a bell. But when I think of Hammond, I think of Hammond organs.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
But this guy was a huge scientist.
I think I've run across him. These books here, the Tube guys,
yeah,
they mentioned pretty much anybody that was into that.
Yeah. He had a company which made radios, Hammond radios.
Oh, okay.
Well-known short-wave radios.
Right. And so,
tell us about your book.
Oh, the book, The Quick and the Dead?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know about the 7 people they hung in Mission Plaza without a trial judge or jury?
Yes, they do.
Walter Murray and his Committee of Vigilance. That's like the official history of San Luis Obispo is that Walter Murray, who was an Englishman and a lawyer, came to town and he rid the town of greaser scum. Those are his words. But basically what they did is they hung 7 Spanish-speaking people in Mission Plaza without a judge, trial, or jury in 1858. And so what my book, The Quick and the Dead, does, I shoot holes in all that and say, no, Walter Murray didn't save the town. Walter Murray was a liar. But he started the first newspaper. Yeah. So he got to print whatever he wanted, right? So that's what The Quick and the Dead's about. And we had 2 Latinos on the Board of Supervisors in 1858, and we haven't had another one since until Dawn Ortiz Legg came up. And there she is back there. So, any other questions?
Thanks, Pete.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for everyone here in the audience. If anybody is interested in picking up Pete's book, we have them right here. Thanks for everybody for joining us online. And then just one final point is, if this is valuable to you, we're a nonprofit organization. If this is something that you want to support, that you want to see continue, we really do rely on the generosity of our community. So I'm not saying you have to leave anything. This is a free event. We're really happy you're here tonight, but think it over. And if this is something that you want to see yourself wanting to support, we would love to have your support on our side. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.